In this next demonstration, we're now going to deploy our Azure virtual machine using PowerShell. It's very important for the course that you start to learn a lot of the PowerShell commands, as there will be questions on them throughout. To begin with, let's look at some of the PowerShell virtual machine commands that you'll be expected to know. First of all, new resource group. To use this PowerShell command, use the commandlet new-azure rm resource group. You then pass two parameters to it. -name is our first one, which is our resource group name that we would type in after that, and then location, which would be East US as an example, or North Central US as I used previously when I deployed the virtual machine using the portal. Next, we've got our new virtual machine. This is a very simple command, new-azure rm VM. However, it only works if you give it a virtual machine configuration. You need to provide names for each of the required resources. So the resource group name that it's going to go in, the name of the virtual machine, its location, etc. In order to do that, you use the create VM configuration commandlet, which is new-azure rm VM config, and pass it the VM name and other parameters as well. Finally, we've got some commands for starting and stopping the VMs. So to start a VM, it's simply start Azure RM VM and pass it your virtual machine, and stop VM is stop Azure RM VM. Now let's go and look at the actual code that will be necessary to deploy the VM. Okay, so to get started, we're back over here in Azure, and obviously we don't want to create it using the GUI, we want to create it using PowerShell, and Microsoft actually gives us a lot of these scripts on their website. So this link, which will be linked in the course itself under Virtual Machine Scripts, allows us to create a fully configured virtual machine with PowerShell. So I strongly recommend for the exam, maybe give this page a quick read, but to really demonstrate it, scroll down to the sample script, click copy, and take that over and paste that into whatever your favorite editor is. In my case, I'm going to use Visual Studio Code. Paste that in there. Obviously, this is the entire script here, so if we scroll up to the top and we'll walk through this. First of all, there's a number of common values that I need. I mentioned we have to create a resource group. So in this case, I'm going to create SL-70533, and I'm going to give it a slightly different name, so PShell, so we can distinguish it between the other resource group we have for the 7533 exam. Next, I've got location, so I'm going to select North Central US. And for the VM name, I'm going to choose SL-VM02. Now let's walk through the script itself, and I'll magnify the screen here so you can see this a little easier. We first need to create the user object, so this gets us a username and password for the virtual machine, so we use the $cred equals get-credential. That's going to prompt us for credentials and store them in the variable called cred, C-R-E-D. We'll then create our resource group. You can see there that we're using that command I mentioned, new-azure rm resource group, and passing it the parameters that we want. In this case, it's taking the $resource group from above, which we've defined already, and the location we mentioned above. We're creating our subnet configuration with new Azure RM virtual network subnet config. We create our virtual network, and we create our public IP address and specify DNS name. Scroll further down. Create our inbound network security group rule and our network security group. So if you saw before when we did it manually, that was filled in by default in the portal. Here we have to actually define it. So we create the rule, which is included as part of creating the security group. So you'll see that the first variable is NSG rule RDP. That's the variable we're saving it in. And then when we create the NSG, it references the security rules stored in NSG rule RDP. We create the virtual network card and associate with the public IP address in NSG. And finally, we take all of this and we create our virtual machine configuration. So here we have $VM config equals new Azure RM VM config, our VM name that we specified in the beginning, and the VM size. In this case, you can see in the script we have standard_D1, and I actually know that's not a valid instance type for that region. So I'm actually going to change that to a standard B2S instead. And I'll go through at the end of this just as PowerShell script you can use. If you want to know what SKUs are available in your region, there is a command you can use to check that. Then we've got the operating system, the source image. This is the actual image that gets deployed, using your CPU memory disk, you have to have kind of a template stored, image file of Windows that we want to use. In this case, I'm using Windows 2016 Data Center, but you could use other images if you wanted to, and we'll talk more about that later. And then we've got the network interface. And finally, we can now create a virtual machine. So in this case, we use new-Azure RM VM, as I mentioned in the PowerPoint slides. But now I select my resource group name, which is a resource group variable that we specified in the beginning, the location, and the VM configuration. If we go ahead and save that, and now go over and let's try to run that. And here we are, I've tabbed over to PowerShell. Let's go in first of all and log into Azure. So we do that by typing in login-Azure RM account, and you can just type login-A and tab through if you need to. And when you hit that, it'll prompt you to log in just like you normally would. Okay, now that's complete. I can go ahead and run my script. So in this case, my script is called deployvm.ps1. And first thing it prompts me for are those credentials. So remember we had that variable which was indicated by the $cred. Let's go ahead and type in the username and password that you want to use there. And now it will go ahead and start deploying our virtual machine. So this may take some time, so we'll speed things up here and show you once it's completed. Okay, so you can see there that everything was completed successfully. The status code response is true. If we go back over to the portal now, and we can see we've got our 7533 PowerShell resource group, select in there, and we should see successfully we have our new virtual machine SL-VM02 and all the associated objects as well. Now if we want to delete that, we can go back into PowerShell, and we can now use the following command: remove Azure RM resource group. Followed by the name of the resource group. Hit enter. It'll ask us if we're sure we want to remove it, so hit Y for yes. PowerShell will now continue and delete the resource group and all of the objects inside of it. So again, great for when we want to just delete everything. We don't want to have to go through and delete all those objects in the resource group manually. We can just come in and delete the entire resource group. Obviously use this with caution, but it will delete everything in there for us. And with that said, we'll speed this up and show you once it's completed. And here it is. You simply get this response that says true. If we head back over to the portal, go over to our resource groups, and we can see it's no longer there. And with that, that concludes this demonstration.